Welcome to this week's edition of Sacred Space. I'm so glad that you have been dropping by here at our YouTube channel at Samson Mills, especially as we have learned to be the church scattered and dispersed in many different places. I'm glad that I'm coming to you and to your home. And here I am, I'm back at my kitchen table. And at my kitchen table, I'm going to talk to you about a spiritual practice. Last week in our sacred space time, we said that it's important for us to set aside the sacred space in our hearts. And we do that by doing spiritual practices. Spiritual practices are things that are rituals and time and physical things that we practice in order to open our hearts up to receive God's presence. And what happens over time is that the spiritual practice, at first we're doing it, and we're doing it, and then it does us. When we write in a journal or we do Bible reading, the practice changes us slowly over time. And the goal is that if we set aside a time and a practice, then our heart is more malleable, more flexible to see God showing up in our midst, in our ordinary places, in extraordinary ways. And I think that's a really wonderful thing to do, but I think when we have the practice, that really unlocks that for us. And so today, I'm going to talk to you about a new spiritual practice that you might want to consider. I am back at my kitchen table here for our sacred space. And the reason I am here is that I already have a spiritual practice on my table that we talked about a couple weeks ago. We may not have named it as such, but here in my mason jar is my faithful questions. And each week we send those out to our email distribution, and they are connected here with the YouTube channel as well. And these are just faithful questions you can ask of yourself or of your family members around the table as a way to think more critically and thoughtfully about the scripture passage we engage with on Sunday morning worship. This has been a really wonderful practice for my family and I. So we have been really engaged in it. So when we're sitting down for dinner and we all get into our places after our prayers and after a few bites, one of us picks a question out of the mason jar and begins to share what the question invites us to share. This past week it was about Jesus. After he'd been raised and he is appearing to the disciples for the third time, and he's on the beach and they're in the fishing boat and he yells at them, "Go and throw your net to the other side." So a lot of the questions have been about the courage to listen to God's voice and about trying new things. And so that's been a fun conversation starter in our home. It's a way to just to practice these questions together and making use of the time they already have. And I will have another practice for you to consider. It is really easy to get bogged down with all of the sadness and the grief and the heaviness of all of this. And we are getting so weary. I'm so thankful for the ways in which you are sheltering in place and we are sheltering in place together so that we can care for our most vulnerable. That in and of itself is a spiritual practice. But I know it's hard. And it's hard to find the things that are good in the midst of those things. But there is still good happening. And so today's spiritual practice comes out of a conversation I had with one of our congregants just yesterday. She's not one who's going to be able to access many of the online offerings that we have. So I wanted to check in with her and see how she was doing in the midst of these things. She's also someone who pretty much lives by herself. And she was amazingly joyful and full of great spirit. And by the end of the conversation, I realized what her trick and her magic was, is that she was deeply grateful. And she practices gratitude every day. As she lays her head down to sleep, she says what she's thankful for in her prayers to God. When she wakes up, she gives thanks to God for seeing her through the night. And that intentional practice of naming things, even simple things of God protecting you in the middle of the night and through the night to the morning, all of those things are moments of giving thanks and saying acts of gratitude. And so she has recognized the power of being grateful and how that can change our hearts. It can change our hearts from maybe of complaint to a place of affirmation. And so today I wanted us to institute a little thing that you could institute at your own home, maybe around your mason jar or Facebook questions, and that is maybe a gratitude journal. And this is going to be a family one that we're going to do. Just alongside the mason jar, we're going to start naming things that we're grateful for around the table. Maybe as a way to get into our prayer for our meal. Can we give thanks for the meal that we're having? Give thanks for the outside weather that has allowed us to play. Give thanks for learning something new at school or learning something new about somebody else. Whatever that is, a phone call, a hug, whatever that tangible thing is or intangible thing, we can name it and write it down. And so this week, I'm going to invite you to practice gratitude by naming things that you are thankful for and using a gratitude journal to do it. So this week, what I want you to do alongside your mason jar of faithful questions, grab the notepad, set it next to it, and a pencil, and keep it right at your table. So whether you're waking up and you're doing your devotional and your questions in the morning, also name the thing that you are thankful for. If you are doing lunch together or dinner together as a family, do your faithful questions and then name something in which you can give thanks for. And then over time, see how that acts of gratitude might change you a bit and open your heart and spirit up to a spirit of thankfulness and appreciation and even joy. So I hope that this will find you well and that you enjoyed this week's Sacred Space. And we have many opportunities to encounter the sacred in the midst of the ordinary. So go and find that. Set your heart afire for that so that you might come and encounter God for yourself. Well, I'll see you next week. See you on Sunday if you're joining us for worship or a Monday Psalm and prayer. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.